I and my wife recently moved with our son from Seattle to a small town in East Texas, and now his kindergarten teacher is discriminating against our family because of my tattoos and appearance. Still seething about this, T-Bye. Longtime lurker, first-time poster. I am at a complete loss regarding my son's teacher and her passive-aggressive behavior toward our family. A bit of background. We lived in Seattle for over a decade where I work as a graphic designer/artist. I have full-sleeve tattoos on both arms, some small pieces on my neck, and I've kept my hair long for years. It's part of my identity as an artist and honestly never been an issue before. My wife is a nurse who recently got hired at the local hospital here in our new town. About 3 months ago, I landed a higher-paying remote position that would allow us to live somewhere with a much lower cost of living than Seattle. After running the numbers, we realized we could actually afford a decent house here instead of our cramped apartment, plus have extra money for our son Lucas's future college fund. The opportunity seemed too good to pass up, even though we were nervous about moving to a more conservative area, given my appearance. I'm not exactly the typical East Texas dad look. Surprisingly, the first couple weeks went okay. Our neighbors were mostly welcoming, if a bit reserved. They brought over pies, asked if we'd be interested in attending their church. We politely declined, and seemed nice enough. I've been working from home while Emma started at the hospital, so I've handled school drop-offs and pickups for Lucas. This is where the problems began. Last Thursday, I arrived at school for pickup and was waiting in the parent area when I noticed Lucas's teacher giving me this uncomfortable look from across the room. When Lucas ran over excitedly to show me a drawing he made, she followed him and asked if she could have a word with me. She led me away from the other parents and said, "For the comfort and safety of the children, we expect parents to adhere to the same dress code as our students." She specifically pointed to my visible tattoos and suggested I wear long sleeves in the future, in this Texas heat, seriously, and added that my long hair gives a questionable impression. I was caught completely off guard, but tried to stay polite. I explained that I'm not a student, my tattoos aren't offensive in any way, and there was nothing about a parent dress code in the school handbook we received. She said, "Well, it might not be in writing, but that's how things are done here. Children are impressionable, you know." Then, before I could respond, another parent came up to ask her something, but she added, "I'm sure you want what's best for Lucas's social adjustment." I noticed several parents watching and whispering, which made me feel both angry and self-conscious, something I haven't felt about my appearance in years. I've worked hard to build my confidence and personal style, and suddenly, I was transported back to being that insecure teenager getting judged. When I got home and told Emma about it, she was supportive but concerned. She pointed out that Lucas is just beginning to make friends, and she's worried about creating problems for him. I called my mom for advice, thinking she'd be on my side, but she surprised me by suggesting I should just cover up to avoid creating waves. "This isn't Seattle anymore," she reminded me. "Thanks, Mom. Super helpful." Emma and I decided to schedule a meeting with the principal to find out if this policy actually exists or if the teacher is overstepping. We both want to stand up against this kind of judgment, but we're also worried about how it might affect Lucas. Parenting is full of these impossible balancing acts. The principal admitted there's no official policy requiring parents to cover tattoos or conform to the student dress code, but he kept talking about community standards, whatever that means. He didn't directly side with the teacher, but he implied I should consider cultural adjustment coming from a different region, which was frustrating for both of us. He agreed to speak with the teacher about approaching parents more respectfully, but made no commitments about changing any expectations. So basically, a whole lot of nothing. I decided to continue picking up Lucas wearing short-sleeved shirts. It's literally 95 degrees here most days. I did tie my hair back as a small compromise, though I resented having to do even that. A week later, I arrived at school pickup and noticed something that made my stomach drop. Lucas was sitting alone while the other children played together in the waiting area. When he saw me, he ran over looking upset and whispered, "The teacher said your daddy needs to learn rules before you can play with friends." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I somehow kept my composure and asked Lucas to wait by the door while I spoke with the teacher. She was chatting with another parent, but her expression changed from friendly to guarded when she saw me approaching. I calmly asked why Lucas was kept from playing with the other kids. She claimed he had been disruptive, and she was merely enforcing classroom discipline. When I mentioned what Lucas told me, she denied saying it, suggesting Lucas misunderstood or was making excuses for misbehavior. I could tell she was lying, and I'm usually pretty good at reading people, but it was her word against a 5-year-old's. The conversation was getting tense when another teacher approached and asked if everything was all right. The teacher's tone immediately changed. She actually made friendly small talk with me about my tattoos, saying her brother is a tattoo artist in Houston and admiring the artwork. The contrast between the two teachers couldn't have been more obvious. That evening, Emma and I had a serious talk over dinner. We're growing concerned that Lucas is facing discrimination because of my appearance. Emma revealed that a nurse she works with, who has a kid in the same class, mentioned that the teacher has been talking to other parents about maintaining standards at the school. Apparently, I'm the threat to these standards. Over the next couple weeks, things got worse. Lucas started becoming anxious about school, sometimes claiming to feel sick in the mornings. He never did this in Seattle. Through the parent grapevine, I learned that the teacher had organized a small group of parents to complain to the school board about declining standards and inappropriate influences. They even added parental conduct and appearance guidelines to the next school board meeting agenda, clearly targeting me without naming me directly. The other teacher privately contacted us to warn us about the meeting and suggested we attend to defend ourselves. I took time off from an important work deadline to prepare, researching school policies and education law regarding discrimination. Never thought I'd need to do this for my kids' kindergarten experience. At the school board meeting, Emma and I sat near the front as the teacher presented her proposal for a formal parent appearance policy that would prohibit visible tattoos, unconventional hair, and other disruptive appearances. She claimed to have research showing children are negatively influenced by exposure to countercultural appearances. I looked it up later. This research doesn't exist. When public comments opened, I approached the microphone. I was nervous but determined to stay calm. I introduced myself as an award-winning graphic designer who moved to their community specifically for its family values and economic opportunity. I explained how my tattoos represent meaningful life events, including the birth of my son, and questioned whether teaching children to judge people based on appearance aligns with the community's values. To my surprise, an older woman stood up to support me. She introduced herself as a longtime resident and former teacher who believes the community should be welcoming rather than judgmental. Then a local business owner pointed out that the town has been trying to attract remote workers and young families like ours to boost the struggling local economy. The teacher actually interrupted, becoming visibly upset and claiming that people like me had ruined her previous community in California, forcing her family to relocate to Texas. It was getting personal and ugly. After the meeting, the other teacher approached us and explained something that put everything in perspective. The teacher left California after her son became involved with a heavily tattooed crowd and developed a drug problem. While I can empathize with her personal history, it doesn't excuse her behavior toward Lucas. The school board tabled the policy discussion, but asked the principal to find a solution that satisfies all parties, essentially avoiding making a clear decision. Meanwhile, Lucas continues to be caught in the middle of adults' issues. My anxiety is through the roof, just thinking about how this is affecting our son. What would you do in my position? Reddit. Stand my ground or cave for my son's sake until we can figure out other options. Now for the first update. First of all, holy crap, you guys. I did not expect my last post to rip my inbox. Seriously. Thank you all for the support, advice, and sharing your own experiences with small-town politics and school discrimination. So Emma and I met with Principal Wilson the morning after my last post. We brought the school handbook with specific sections highlighted, as many of you suggested. Great call, showing there was absolutely nothing about a parent dress code in there. The principal was a middle-aged man. He was not openly hostile, but indicated that we were not going to get what we wanted. The meeting started with some small talk about how we were adjusting to the town. Awkward. But when we brought up Mrs. Patterson's comments about my appearance, his entire demeanor shifted. He leaned back in his chair and said, Well, while there's no official policy requiring parents to conform to student dress codes, we do have certain community standards here. I pointed out that community standards isn't actually a policy that can be enforced, and Emma calmly asked for clarification on what specific rule I had broken. The principal just kept repeating vague phrases about cultural adjustments and respecting local customs when moving from a place like Seattle. It was frustrating as hell because he never directly supported Mrs. Patterson, but he also made zero commitments to address her behavior. After about 20 minutes of this circular conversation, he finally agreed to speak with Mrs. Patterson about approaching parents more respectfully, which felt like a meaningless platitude rather than any real solution. We left feeling completely unsatisfied. Classic administrative non-answer that resolved nothing. Several of you predicted this exact outcome in the comments, and you were spot on. Quick note, many commenters pointed out that I should document everything, and I've been keeping detailed notes of all interactions with timestamps and direct quotes. I've also saved emails and started recording conversations when legally permitted. Texas is a one-party consent state, as someone mentioned. I decided I wasn't going to be bullied into changing my appearance. I continued picking Lucas up, wearing short-sleeved shirts that showed my tattoos. It's literally 95 degrees and humid. Covering up isn't just uncomfortable, it's potentially dangerous. As a small compromise, I did start tying my hair back in a neat ponytail, though I resented having to change anything about myself. For the first few days after our meeting with the principal, things were tense but manageable. Mrs. Patterson would give me these smiles during pickup, and I noticed she kept her distance. I thought maybe the principal's talk, however ineffective it seemed, had at least put her on notice that we weren't going to be pushed around. Then last Thursday happened. I arrived at school for pickup at the usual time and immediately noticed something was off. All the other kindergartners were playing together in the waiting area, building with blocks, coloring, the usual kid stuff. But Lucas was sitting alone at a desk in the corner. When he saw me, he ran over and whispered, "Daddy, teacher said I can't play with friends because you need to learn rules first." I somehow managed to keep my composure. The last thing Lucas needed was to see me lose it in his classroom. I asked him to wait by the door while I spoke with Mrs. Patterson. She was chatting with another mom, but the second she spotted me approaching, her entire demeanor changed. Her smile disappeared and her posture stiffened. I kept my voice low and steady as I asked why Lucas wasn't allowed to play with the other children. She immediately claimed he had been disruptive during class, and she was merely enforcing classroom discipline. When I mentioned what Lucas had told me about her comments regarding me needing to learn rules, she denied saying anything of the sort, suggesting Lucas had either misunderstood or was making excuses for misbehavior. The conversation was getting increasingly tense. She stood there straight up, lying to my face. I've worked with enough clients to recognize when someone is BSing me. Just as I was about to press further, another teacher approached and asked if everything was all right. This was Miss Alvarez, who teaches art at the school. The change in Mrs. Patterson's behavior was immediate. Suddenly she was friendly, explaining she was just discussing Lucas's day with me. Then, Mrs. Patterson started making friendly small talk with me about my tattoos, saying her brother is a tattoo artist in Houston and admiring the artwork. I was completely thrown by this routine, but Ms. Alvarez seemed genuinely interested in my ink, asking thoughtful questions about the designs. The contrast between the two teachers couldn't have been more obvious. While Mrs. Patterson acted differently, Ms. Alvarez seemed authentically welcoming. I thanked them both for their time, probably a bit stiffly, and collected Lucas to head home. That evening, after Lucas went to bed, Emma and I had a serious talk over dinner. She revealed something that made everything click. A nurse she works with, who has a daughter in Lucas's class, mentioned that Mrs. Patterson had been talking to other parents about maintaining standards at the school. Apparently, I was the unnamed threat to these standards, and she'd been rallying support from some of the more conservative parents. To answer some common questions from my last post. 1. Yes, we've considered switching Lucas to another class, but there's only one kindergarten teacher at this small school. 2. No, homeschooling isn't an option right now with both of us working full-time. 3. Moving again so soon isn't financially possible after just buying a house here. Emma was furious, but also worried. Lucas has started showing anxiety about school, something he never experienced in Seattle. Yesterday morning, he actually claimed his stomach hurt and begged to stay home, this from a kid who normally loves school. We let him stay home, and he was magically cured an hour later, which confirmed our suspicions that this was anxiety rather than illness. I'm really struggling with the right approach here. Part of me wants to stand my ground completely. I shouldn't have to hide who I am. And what kind of message does that send to Lucas about conformity and bullying? But the other part of me is watching my 5-year-old become increasingly anxious about school, and I wonder if I'm putting my principles above his immediate well-being. Editing to add. Some people asked about my specific tattoos. They're mostly botanical designs, geometric patterns, and a few meaningful symbols related to our family. Nothing violent, sexual, or even remotely offensive. I'm not walking around with skulls and daggers or anything that could reasonably upset a child. The situation got even more complicated over the weekend. Emma's coworker, the one with a kid in Lucas's class, texted her to warn us that Mrs. Patterson has apparently organized a small group of parents to complain to the school board about declining standards and inappropriate influences at the school. They've even added parental conduct and appearance guidelines to the next school board meeting agenda, clearly targeting me without naming me directly. Ms. Alvarez also reached out to us privately to inform us about the meeting and suggested we should attend to defend ourselves. She supports us, which is a huge relief amid all this small-town drama. So here we are. I'm taking time away from an important work deadline to prepare for this school board meeting, researching policies and education law regarding discrimination, things I never imagined I'd need to do for kindergarten, honestly. Emma and I are united on this, but we're both anxious about how it might affect Lucas if this becomes an even bigger issue. The school board meeting is next Tuesday evening, and I'm both dreading it and determined to stand up for our family. I'm not going to lie. I'm nervous about speaking in front of what might be a hostile crowd, but I also refuse to be bullied out of being myself, especially when I've done absolutely nothing wrong. The coming weeks will be crucial for Lucas's school experience and our family's place in this community. I'll post another update after the school board meeting to let you all know how it goes. Now for the second update, Update 2. Thanks to everyone who's been following this tattoo school drama saga. For those of you just joining us, I've linked my previous posts below. Buckle up because things have somehow gotten even more ridiculous. The 2 weeks since my last update have been very eventful. Lucas has started showing serious anxiety about school, something we've never dealt with before. He's gone from excited to get to class to suddenly developing mysterious stomach aches every morning. The first time it happened, Emma and I were genuinely concerned and kept him home, only for him to make a miraculous recovery about an hour after school would have started. Classic school avoidance behavior. Any parents dealing with school anxiety, I feel your pain now. This is heartbreaking to watch. Emma and I have been trying everything to make mornings easier. Special breakfasts, extra time for cuddles before leaving, even letting him bring his favorite stuffed animal in his backpack. Hidden, of course. He's very concerned about looking in front of his friends. But the anxiety persists. Just yesterday, he asked me if I could wear dad clothes for pickup. When I asked what he meant, he said, "Clothes that don't make teacher mad." I nearly lost it right there. For the record, I've been dressing exactly the same as I have for years. Short-sleeve button-ups or plain t-shirts that happen to show my tattoos because, it's Texas. Nothing provocative or inappropriate whatsoever. Things took an unexpected turn last weekend when Emma got a text from her coworker, the one with a kid in Lucas's class, warning us that Mrs. Patterson has apparently been organizing a small parent group to formally complain to the school board. The topic? Declining standards and inappropriate influences at the school. Emma showed me a screenshot of the school board meeting agenda that her coworker forwarded. They've literally added parental conduct and appearance guidelines as an agenda item. They're not even being subtle about targeting me without naming me directly. I mean, seriously, these people seem focused on policing another parent's appearance, conservatives wanting more rules and regulations when it suits their personal preferences. That same day, we got a message from Miss Alvarez, Lucas's art teacher who had been friendly about my tattoos. She reached out privately to give us a heads up about the meeting and suggested we absolutely should attend to defend ourselves. It was honestly such a relief to know we had at least one ally at the school. She mentioned that there were other teachers who found the whole situation ridiculous, but were staying quiet because Mrs. Patterson has been there forever and apparently has some political connections in town. Small-town politics can be very petty. I ended up taking time away from an important work deadline, which my boss was surprisingly understanding about when I explained the situation, to prepare for this school board meeting. I spent hours researching school policies and education law regarding discrimination, things I never imagined I'd need to know for my kids' kindergarten experience. Emma and I practiced what I would say, trying to strike the right balance between standing my ground and not coming across as combative, which would just feed into their stereotype. The school board meeting was last night. When we arrived, the room was much fuller than I expected for a regular meeting, according to Ms. Alvarez. Emma and I decided to sit near the front so that Mrs. Patterson and her group could see me directly. After some boring administrative stuff, they got to the agenda item about parental appearance guidelines. Mrs. Patterson stood up with a folder full of papers. She launched into this presentation about how certain appearances can be disruptive to the educational environment, and how children are impressionable and need consistent positive role modeling from all adults in the school environment, including parents. She referenced some vague research, claiming children are negatively influenced by exposure to countercultural appearances. Several parents nodded along with her. I recognized a few from pickup. When public comments opened, I approached the microphone. Emma squeezed my hand as I got up, and that gesture gave me the strength I needed. I introduced myself calmly as a graphic designer who had moved to their community specifically for its family values and economic opportunity. I explained that my tattoos represent meaningful life events, my son's birth date in Roman numerals, botanical elements that remind me of my late father's garden, symbols that tell my family's story. I kept my voice steady as I asked whether teaching children to judge people based on appearance aligns with the values this community claims to uphold. I pointed out that in my professional field, creative expression is valued and that I'd been successful enough to afford moving our family to a nice home in their community where we pay taxes and contribute to the local economy. I had practiced this speech many times, but several commenters on my last post suggested highlighting the economic benefit we bring to the community, which turned out to be brilliant advice. What happened next surprised me. An older woman stood up and asked to speak. She introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson, a resident for over 50 years and former teacher at the elementary school. I braced myself for more criticism, but instead, she said the community should be focusing on welcoming new families rather than driving them away with judgment. She looked directly at Mrs. Patterson and said, "This isn't who we are as a town," and that she was disappointed to see this kind of behavior from an educator. The atmosphere in the room changed. Then a man in a button-up shirt and khakis stood up and identified himself as the owner of the hardware store downtown. He mentioned how the town council had just last month discussed strategies for attracting remote workers and young families to boost the struggling local economy. "And now we're telling them they're not welcome if they don't look exactly like us?" he asked. Mrs. Patterson interrupted him, which I later learned is against meeting protocol, and claimed that people like him had ruined her previous community in California, forcing her family to relocate to Texas for traditional values. The chairman had to ask her multiple times to wait her turn to speak. After the meeting officially ended, Ms. Alvarez approached us and revealed information that made everything make sense. Apparently, Mrs. Patterson left California 5 years ago after her son became involved with what she called a heavily tattooed crowd and developed a serious drug problem. Ms. Alvarez only knew this because her sister worked at the same school in California where Mrs. Patterson used to teach. I felt this weird mix of anger at being discriminated against and a tiny bit of empathy for her personal history. It doesn't excuse her behavior toward Lucas, not by a long shot, but at least there's some context for her irrational focus on my appearance. The school board ended up tabling the policy discussion, but asked the principal to find a solution that satisfies all parties, so we're still in limbo. But at least the most extreme version of the policy wasn't passed. As we were leaving, the PTA president approached us and mentioned that the annual Fall Festival is next week, where parents are expected to volunteer. Mrs. Patterson is coordinating the kindergarten activities. So we're now faced with another issue. Do I volunteer as expected and risk more tension, or step back and potentially make Lucas feel different from his classmates whose parents are all participating? I'll try to respond to comments, but I'm absolutely swamped with catching up on work after taking so much time to prepare for this meeting. Plus, Lucas has been extra clingy lately and needs lots of reassurance, which obviously comes first. I want to sincerely thank everyone who's offered support and advice. I never expected to have to fight for my right to have tattoos in 2023, but here we are. I'm trying to model resilience for Lucas while also protecting him from unnecessary stress, which is a tough balance to strike. Thanks for staying with me through this journey. Now for the final update. The tattooed dad versus small town school drama. Thank you all for the incredible support through this wild ride. Your advice seriously helped us navigate this mess. It's been almost 3 weeks since my last update, and so much has happened, I barely know where to start. The fallout from that school board meeting was both better and worse than I expected. While some parents and teachers started quietly showing support, Mrs. Patterson seemed to double down on her vendetta against our family. The day after the board meeting, Lucas came home. Despite practicing for weeks and being initially selected, he was suddenly removed from the fall festival performance. When I asked what happened, he said Mrs. Patterson told him there wasn't enough room anymore. Emma and I knew this was targeted. I sent an email to Mrs. Patterson asking for clarification, keeping it neutral. Her response was unhelpful, citing space limitations and giving other children opportunities while ignoring that Lucas had already been selected and practicing. When I forwarded the exchange to Ms. Alvarez, our ally at the school, she confirmed my suspicions that no other kids had been cut, just Lucas. The situation was getting ridiculous. Emma started documenting everything in a detailed journal. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening in the parent community. After the school board meeting, 3 different parents approached us to indicate support. One mom even invited Lucas for a play date with her son. These gestures meant a lot to us. Emma's coworker told her that some parents who initially sided with Mrs. Patterson were uncomfortable with how personal her actions against us had become. With the fall festival approaching, we knew things were about to come to a head. The annual event is a big deal in this small town. The entire community shows up, not just school families. Parents are expected to volunteer, and given my background in art, I'd already signed up weeks ago to run the face painting booth. 2 days before the festival, Principal Wilson called asking for a meeting. When we arrived, he suggested that to keep the peace, perhaps I could volunteer in a less visible role, maybe parking lot duty or setting up tables, rather than face painting. I was about to agree when Emma spoke up. She reminded me of a promise we'd made to each other years ago, that we would never again compromise who we are to make other people comfortable. We'd moved past that part of our lives, and she wasn't about to let me change now, especially with Lucas watching how we handled this. She was right. I declined his suggestion, explaining that I would keep my commitment to the face painting booth as planned. The day of the fall festival arrived. I set up the face painting booth early, arranging my supplies and putting up a display board showing sample designs. Kids were already lining up, pointing at the designs they wanted. Mrs. Patterson appeared shortly after I opened the booth. She informed me there had been a change of plans, and I was now assigned to parking lot duty. When I showed her my volunteer confirmation email, specifically requesting my artistic skills for the face painting booth, her response was dismissive. "This is a direct instruction from the festival committee," she said. "The parking lot needs more supervision. I'm sure you understand the importance of keeping our children safe." Several parents and kids were watching our interaction. I noticed Lucas nearby. I decided to stand my ground while remaining calm. "I understand safety concerns," I replied, "but I've committed to this booth, and these kids are already waiting there. Perhaps someone from the parking assignment could switch with me?" She responded negatively. "This isn't a negotiation. This is exactly the problem with your kind, thinking the rules don't apply to you." The parents nearby exchanged glances. I kept my voice steady. "I'm not sure what you mean by my kind, Mrs. Patterson, but I'm simply fulfilling the volunteer role I was assigned." The superintendent walked up and asked what the problem was. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Patterson accused me of being disruptive and inappropriate for children, pointing at my tattoos as evidence. To my surprise, some other parents spoke up. They told the superintendent how Mrs. Patterson had been targeting Lucas and discriminating against our family. One mom even mentioned how her daughter had told her Lucas wasn't allowed to be line leader because his daddy has drawings on his arms. The superintendent took Mrs. Patterson aside. I went back to painting faces, my hands shaking a bit. By the end of the festival, my booth had the longest line. Many parents chatted with me while their kids got painted, asking about my work and how we were settling into town. It felt surreal. After weeks of feeling ostracized, suddenly we were being welcomed. The most satisfying moment came 3 days later. The superintendent called to apologize and inform us that Mrs. Patterson was being reassigned to administrative duties. Lucas's class would now be taught by Miss Alvarez, who had specifically requested the change. He also mentioned that the district would be implementing anti-bias training for all staff before the next semester. Lucas is different now. Yesterday, he showed me an art project Miss Alvarez had assigned. The kids had to draw something that made their family special. Lucas drew a picture of me with colorful swirls on my arms. When I asked what it was, he said, "That's your art, Dad. Miss Alvarez says your drawings tell your story." I'm not crying. You're crying. To clarify, since many are asking, we have no plans to pursue any legal action against Mrs. Patterson or the school. While we probably could have a case for discrimination, this is still the community we've chosen to live in, and we're focused on healing and building relationships rather than extending the conflict. Plus, the school has taken appropriate action, and Miss Alvarez is amazing with the kids. The most unexpected outcome is that I've been asked to give a presentation about graphic design careers to the 4th and 5th grade classes next month, and 3 different parents have approached me about doing freelance design work for their small businesses. Being the tattooed dad who stood up to Mrs. Patterson has given me some local recognition. Emma jokes that this is how small towns work. You're an outsider until you're suddenly not. One minute, you're the tattooed guy from Seattle, and the next, you're one of us. Edit. Several people have asked about Mrs. Patterson. From what we've heard, she's working in the district office now, processing attendance records and field trip forms. The superintendent was careful not to call it a demotion, but everyone knows that's what it is. I almost feel bad for her. What started as a simple post seeking advice about tattoo discrimination turned into a life-changing experience for our family. I've learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to hide who you are, even when it would be easier.